Hey ladies, this is Mocha Mommy here bringing you another video, and this video is just like a little bit of a rant, I guess. I've been watching a really good content creator by the name of Lizzie Rants, and she just kind of goes off the dome and just talks during her videos about her own personal experience. And I want to kind of do something really similar because I just want to give you guys an example and some personal stories about my experience as a Gen Xer, and just kind of explain to you guys what my experience is like, and then just give you some examples as to why they mad. Why they mad? They meaning Gen X Black men, the collective of Gen X Black men. Why are they so mad at us Black women? Why? Because they see us as privileged, and they feel that they need to knock us down a peg. Now, of course, as Black women, we're like, what privilege do you mean? You know, we're definitely don't have a lot of currency in beauty or in the mainstream media. What do you mean we're privileged? Let me kind of explain it to you from their perspective so you can kind of understand the origin of the anger. And then when you see it and you come across it, you can kind of diffuse and divest from it because you know what it is you're looking at, okay? Because this is not just about fodder to fight some dudes online during some debate panel. This really is life advice to help you kind of navigate what it is you're seeing in the real world, because I really don't care what happens on YouTube. I care about how you navigate the real world. So just let me explain to you a little bit about how they see us as privileged, and then how that can help you to better navigate these situations, okay? Now, one of the first confrontations I remember having was actually with a male cousin. He saw me as privileged. This was like the late 80s, early 90s. We want to go to the mall with our friends. We're like preteens, young teenagers. And that's what young preteens, young teenagers did, like late 80s, early 90s. So I have like a little short set on with a pair of Skips. Skips are basically like cheap canvas sneakers. You can get them in a bunch of different colors. And basically I had like a color that matched the short set outfit I was wearing that day. So I'm wearing these Skips and this short set. And this was around the time when Jordans were like the biggest sneaker to have. As a young Black man, you needed to have these Jordans. But then at the same time, there was a lot of violence around it. Young Black men were getting robbed and sometimes killed over these sneakers. So my aunt did not buy a pair for my cousin, my male cousin. So we're going to get ready to go to the mall. You know, my mom's going to drop us off. I'm so excited because, you know, we're old enough now to walk around the mall without our parents, you know. And he's like, so you get to go to the mall in a pair of Skips, but I get to go in the mall and I'm going to be made fun of for the shoes that I'm wearing. Now, it wasn't like he didn't have high quality shoes. He just didn't have Jordans, because my aunt, understandably so, was worried about his safety. So therefore, he was really angry at me that I had this quote unquote privilege to wear Skips in public and not be made fun of, because women could easily shop at Payless and get Skips and colored sandals that match their outfits and dresses and short sets. Whereas Black men, on the other hand, felt pressured to wear a certain shoe. So he wasn't mad at the dangerous situation that young Black men his age were creating for other young Black men his age by robbing and killing each other over these sneakers. He also was not mad at the fact that men his age, his peer group, would criticize and ridicule him for not having these same said sneakers. So of course he's mad at me, and he's mad at my aunt. So because he can't do anything about the larger demographic of Black men who are putting him in this difficult social and safety situation, what does he do? He pushes me down the stoop on our way to the car to get to the mall. Right? That's how he expresses his frustration with that whole situation. Is that excusable? Absolutely not. But it's just a reasoning behind how they see us as privileged. Another thing too, is when it came kind of time for our first job, our first entry into the economic marketplace. The hip thing to do, the cool thing to do, late 80s, early 90s, was to work at urban clothing stores. Places like Foot Locker, places like VIM. I don't even know if they have these stores anymore, but these places that were like Dr. J's. It was like these urban clothing stores where you can get the latest in jeans and hoodies and Jordans and sports urban gear, So a lot of times they did have very discriminatory hiring practices. I'm not going to lie, because they saw young Black boys as theft risks, and they had experience with young Black boys, robbing inventory and selling inventory out of back doors or stealing inventory. Even some young Black girls, they had problems with stealing inventory to please these Black boys, hence pick Mishas. So basically they would get rejected from these places with these discriminatory hiring practices, like, oh, we're only looking for key holders and you have to be 18, or, but basically it was just trying to say, like, hey, we're not hiring teenage Black boys. Now, men in my family did have fathers. They did have uncles, right? But particularly this situation, the men in my family, a lot of, especially my dad's side, they were all blue collar workers. They were skilled tradesmen. But the professional Black men in my family who were on my mom's side, they were just kind of like, you need a job, any job, so they were not really like hiring like that because they were like elected officials or they had police officers in the military. They were professional. And they just didn't have like the level of entry level positions that they could offer. But then my dad and my uncles on my dad's side, it was all manual labor. And some of these young middle-class boys didn't want to do that. Me, I had a mom, I had aunties, and those aunties and my nana, they were part of the same sorority that I ended up pledging back in the 90s. Okay. So then that was a whole nother network of Black women that I knew, not to mention church, not to mention just, there was a whole bunch of Miss Geraldines and Miss Brendas who knew things. So there was a woman by the name of Miss Barbara. Okay. Miss Barbara was an owner. Her and her husband were owners of a fast food franchise. And she kind of gave me the game. Miss Barbara, thanks, God rest her soul. Bless Miss Barbara. So Miss Barbara and Mr. Oscar were like, what teenagers really need to do is work in fast food, because fast food places are open longer than a lot of your clothing retailers. One, so there's more hours to work that they can give a teenager. Number two, because they're open more hours, there's more available shifts. So you can work full time over the summer and then part time over the school year around your schooling and sports schedules. And with that time in service, you can move up the chain. So over your high school career, you can earn more working fast food, because a lot of fast food places, this is when they first started opening late, like staying open till around 2 a.m. And there were more shifts that were available. So you were able to work full time over the summer. And then because I was in this fast food place, Ms. Diane, I remember Ms. Diane, she would always get her coffee from me before on her way to church, and Ms. Diane, as Ms. Diane she ended up getting a high level management position in like a major retail pharmacy chain. So she was like, oh, you such and such's daughter, you're such and such's niece, you work at the fast food restaurant. We hiring cashiers if you ever want to jump up to X amount of dollars per hour. And so I worked fast food that first year, but then Miss Diane ended up, giving me another position. And that was so great because I was interested in the medical field. And that ended up looking awesome when I would apply to the nursing program at Howard, right? Having this retail pharmacy manager sign me that letter of recommendation. And that all came from taking Miss Barbara's advice to work fast food. Now, my male cousins, they didn't want to do manual labor. They didn't want to do fast food because of how it would look to their boys. And unfortunately, a lot of times Black men don't have as big of a network of other Black men that can support them and that can give them advice and that can give them that long-term advice. I mean, it's like my dad and my uncles, they come from that generation that just didn't really sit down and talk and explain things, if they were even there, right? Because some young Black men didn't even have that there. Like, I love my uncles, I love my dad, but they really don't like sit down and like talk to you, because that's just how men of that older generation are. Those boomers, I'm serious. Like, the most conversations I've had with my dad was probably once he retired and got his hip replaced and I needed to take care of him. Those were some of the longest conversations I've ever had with my dad. Like, Vicodin facilitated a lot of our deep conversations. Like, dead serious when I say that. Like, because really, they just didn't really talk like that. And then, you know, things that they would kind of say too about Black women of that generation. You know, like if my auntie would have like her sorority sisters or women from the Eastern Star over the house, you know, my uncle would like disappear, be like, don't go in that hen house. They cackling in that hen house. So a lot of my cousins, my Black male cousins, weren't even privy to the conversations that they were having, that Ms. Barbara and Ms. Diane was talking to me about professional development. So you see, this is another thing that kind of breeds that bitterness and that anger and making them think that we have more privilege than them. So these are just kind of examples just from my family life. Now, when it comes to my male cousins, they're the quote unquote good Black men, right? But at the same time too, they have non-Black partners who they're not married to, who they live with. They have baby mamas. They have 2 and 3 different families, you know, like a lot of them, you know, they have like a high school girlfriend who has their baby. They have like an ex-wife who has kids that are my age. And then they have the new wife, you know, who's probably 10, 15 years younger than them. And then they're just starting all over with toddlers and they're in their 40s. I mean, they literally have 3 families, right? That they're having to deal with and manage. And even though they're high earners and professional men, that's just a lot for a 20-something, young 30-something to deal with, which is one of the reasons why I'm telling the story to you guys, because just looking at my analytics, you guys are in that age demographic that might think that something like a 40-something year old professional man would be attractive because of what you see among men your age. And I'm telling you that it's 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. You just got to pick your poison because, yeah, it's a challenge. Either way you decide. So even though this quote unquote privilege that they think that we have is no excuse for the vitriol that Gen Xers of the manosphere is spitting out at you guys, understand that this is somewhat the origin of it. The fact that we're not as tied to the opinions of our peers simply because we have other networks of Black women. So if I'm being picked on at school, I have a Miss Geraldine whose house I can sit at until the mean girls leave the bus stop. You know, I have a Nana who could introduce me to people in her professional network because that would make me a legacy coming into her same sorority. So there are privileges that I have, and I'm putting that in, you know, honestly, I really do think it is privilege. It is a privilege that I have I have a privilege of a network of other Black women who can help me along my journey and who can help to guide me. Even though it's not always perfect, it still is a network that a lot of Black men don't have. Because this is the biggest thing I've noticed too, the difference between Black men and Hispanic men. Because technically, my mother-in-law is only 16 years older than my husband. His father, God rest his soul, is only 19 years older than him. So this was basically a 2 teen high school sweethearts. This is a teen pregnancy you're talking about. So when my husband was born, his father, you know, his abuelo made his son join the military to support this family, to support this new family that he was creating. And then my mother-in-law's uncle, my uncles, Tio Fonzie, Tio June, Tio Oscar, right? They pretty much helped my husband to raise up, right? So it's not just about missing fathers from the home. It's missing uncles. It's missing grandpas that a lot of them don't have, So that whole network of Black men that a lot of young Black men growing up in Gen X did not have, that I had as a Black woman. So this is one of the reasons why, too, they're so angry with us. So this is one conversation that it stands out in my mind. I mean, I'm telling you, it was like yesterday where I kind of really remember this conversation, to where my cousin had went to my dad and my uncle. They were in the garage, like fixing a car or washing a car, doing something, they were kind of like doing some work, and my cousin comes out to my dad and my uncle, and I'm in the front yard, with a bunch of other little girls from the neighborhood, whatever. And my cousin kind of comes to my uncle and my dad, talking about how he wanted another pair of Jordans, because finally he did end up getting a pair eventually. And he's like, what? Why you need another pair? Because basically he was playing basketball in those shoes, but then he was also wearing them like to school every day. And they were getting kind of worn out. And of course, now he's being teased for it. And he kind of is bringing this up. And, my uncle's like, you got like 4 or 5 pair of good shoes. Why are you just trying to wear those shoes all the time? Pick another pair of shoes, basically. Like, no sympathy for what my cousin is kind of going through. And then he's like, yeah, but this person and this person is saying these things about me, and they're saying this about me. And my dad is like, who? And, he names the names of the boys who are picking on him. Now, we're in public school at this time. We had gone through Catholic school for most of elementary and all of middle school. So now we're in the public high school. So that was a whole nother issue. So basically he's saying like, this person and this person are making fun of me because of the shoes I wear. And then my dad was like, listen, let me tell you something. Don't ever let no pocket change nigga make your $100 decisions. And then just went back to working on the car. Now, in a sense, my dad was right. Don't let these people who don't have really any financial literacy or any kind of financial wherewithal make decisions for you that could cost you in the long run. Because again, those sneakers were very expensive, but that was the extent of the conversation. It wasn't about like self-worth and standing up against bullies, or really encouraging him to be an individual and stand in his individuality, or valuing the morals that he was raised with, to not be caught up in all this whole materialistic game where he could potentially even be hurt as a result of the clothes he decided to wear. So none of that really happened. It was just kind of like, don't let these pocket change niggas make your $100 decisions. And although it was right, it just wasn't. So when I see these guys on these 8-hour lives, it's because this is probably the most extensive conversation they've ever had with another man. And that's if the man was present. That's if the man was present. So if you really think about it, my male cousins, were privileged to have my dad and my uncles around. So imagine if they didn't have that at all. So you see what I'm saying? It's like, but even then conversations weren't really happening. So, but at the same time, if you will go in the house and the women were cooking, or the women were sewing, things for like a church function, you could sit down and you could have whole conversations. We could have whole conversations with aunties and moms and nanas and grandmas and big mamas. We could have whole conversations, especially if we were helping in the kitchen. So it's not an excuse for the bitterness, for the vitriol, for like a lot of the unhealthy habits that they developed coming out of this, being young men in the 80s and 90s. But it just puts it into context of where their mindset was at that time. Now, you see, another way they see Black female privilege, I'm going to draw you a parallel here, because you see this a lot in the $10 a month gyms. One of the reasons why I stay away from them, particularly in this area, because this is part of the culture here. You will see these pretty much homeless men. These are guys who live in their cars, guys who might live with a family member or be crashing on a couch temporarily in between places. Because homeless doesn't necessarily mean sleeping under a bridge. 46% of America's homeless is a Black man, even though they're only 6% of the population. Like, that's how pervasive homelessness is, okay? And homelessness doesn't mean you're sleeping under a bridge. Homelessness just means you don't have a lease or a mortgage in your name, and you can't get one in the next night, and you don't foresee yourself getting one in the next 90 days. So you don't have a permanent place to get mail. That's technically homeless, okay? Even if you're sleeping on a friend's couch, you hanging out or over aunties, you over Big Mama's house, right? So in these $10 a month gyms, you will see this a lot. It's where these hobosexuals are kind of hanging around the gym looking for overweight, insecure Black women. So the buff ones can kind of get in easier, right? Because they can say that they're trainers and they can offer to train them. And then they can eventually start some kind of romantic relationship. They can start some kind of romantic relationship and then move themselves in with these overweight, insecure Black women. The skinny guy does not have that option as much. And sometimes the skinny guy, even though just as homeless as the buff dude, he might have a job. He might have a part-time job, working retail or as a clerk or, doing some seasonal work, but he's still homeless. He might be homeless and employed, but he's still homeless nonetheless. So he's like, you would rather have these good looking guys. And okay, let's get this straight. Y'all are both homeless. Y'all both need a roof over your head. She just picked the homeless buff guy as opposed to the homeless skinny guy with the part-time job. But y'all are both homeless. And it's the same thing with these Section 8 baby mamas. Both of these guys are pretty much homeless, but they will try to latch themselves to these, Section 8 baby moms, or just anybody, any baby mom basically, who might be desperate but has a roof over her head. So they're still both homeless, but it's just the good looking, more charismatic guy gets the resources, even though he's the quote unquote less option. But you guys are both still homeless. Then these same guys still get real mad when the woman who is the homeowner, the lessee, tries to call the shots. But basically, it's her house. I mean, it's still her home. So, and you're still homeless. So they're not really coming to these relationships from a place of power and wholeness anyway, because they don't have a place to stay. So they kind of have to fall up under her rules because it's her home. And they're upset about that, especially when she kicked a homeless ass out. So they're upset, and they can try to talk about her marketability, well, her weight and but believe it or not, there are lines and lines of hobosexuals who will be willing to fall in line for what it is she says for the amount of time she says it. So if we're being 100% real, I mean, I don't suggest you guys get in this, situation, because your insecurity should not drive you to choose a partner. And this is one of the reasons why Level Up is so dangerous to them, because these women are now starting to think, okay, I'm worth more, and I'm in the gym because I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to get better, and I don't have to put up with this. So yeah, that leaves a lot more, hobosexuals out there that won't have a place to stay because, she now has in her mind that she deserves better. So that's another problem that they have. They consider with Black female privilege, because they really feel that you should look down to go date them. So you guys have to realize also too that by like the 80s, 90s, when you were a Black man, some of the most visible Black male social figures, the Black men who you looked up to, were athletes and entertainers. So if you just take football, for instance, pretty much after like the 80s, early 90s, when that class, the Reggie Whites, Jerry Rice, Doug Williams, the men who would later like ascend to the throne in popularity, who would come to break their records, would be the sons of single mothers. So they would credit their single moms for a lot of their success. So if you were like a young Black man, like my male cousins, who were becoming parents at this time, like the late 90s, early 2000s, and you were becoming a parent at this time, there was a lot going on in the media that was diminishing your significance. So if you had gotten into a relationship with some girl you had no business being with in the first place, right? Because that's really what it was. And then you're looking at the most popular Black men in media, pretty much all of them were raised by single mothers. And it really only kind of, it was like an external confirmation of your insignificance as a father, already into like very, very troubled relationships that you had created, because you just made a bunch of promises you couldn't keep, right? And I had talked about this in my earlier videos, how sometimes it wasn't as if the good girls didn't like them or that they were rejected for thugs. The good girls just liked them, but they just were not sexually active. And at a time where they were pushing a lot of sexual, being a player and being a pimp and being sexually active on young boys. So then they would go to the quote unquote hood girls who were sexually active, and they just didn't have a lot of currency with those girls. But then eventually when those girls kind of came of age a little bit, maybe they had one or two kids. Now they want to they got a little bit more mature, and now they want to date these guys. But those of us who were like the good girls, we had graduated and we're looking at you like, we don't want you and your kids. We don't want you and your baby mama drama. We don't want to deal with that. Like, because we already had a lot to lose. We already had a lot at stake. I mean, think about it. My older sister at this time, when my male cousins were having kids, was applying to medical school. I was about to be commissioned as an officer in the United States Army at a time where a war was going on. So a lot of women who were my age didn't want to deal with that mess, who had avoided getting pregnant. Like, we were the ones who were like the Claire Huxtables. We were looking for Cliff. We were not looking for your baby mama drama. And the reason why they acted this way was not to impress us, but it was to impress them, some of these male peers, right? Like what my father had said, you were making $100 decisions based on the advice of these pocket change ass niggas. And then they had to deal with that. And they're still dealing with that because now they're almost grandparents because they're just repeating a cycle. Okay, so ladies, none of these things are excuses for bad behavior, but just to give you something to think about. When a man is looking for a woman, he's looking for one of three things. One, he's looking for a helpmeet. Or two, he's looking for someone to co-sign his mediocrity. Or three, he's looking for somebody to subsidize his failures. So you really need to figure out what that guy is actually looking for. Help me, that's a great thing, because that means he has dominion of the earth and he's just looking for someone to be by his side, to be the yin to his yang. somebody to co-sign on his mediocrity. That's a guy who really has no ambition, no drive, no goals, nothing. So he just is looking for something to give him some kind of external validation. And to subsidize his failures, that's the guy who's just spent decades making a mistake. And now he needs a place to stay, someone to help him with his kids, someone to help subsidize a lot of his financial failures. So I'm just saying this because I want you guys to think about it. Is he looking for a helpmeet, a cosigner, or a subsidizer? This is Mocha Mommy, and I'll see you in the next video.